Well, our next guest needs very little introduction. He is the author of the best-selling book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve, now in its 5th edition and 32nd printing. His name, the author, is G. Edward Griffin. Ed, it's great to have you back on Follow the Money Radio.
Well, thank you, Jerry. I appreciate your inviting me back.
Absolutely. Well, we've had you on now several times. We've spent time mainly in the past delving into your book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve. This book, it has impacted so many people, including myself. It is a book, as you've described in the past on this podcast, as a really good doorstop because it's so thick. But at the same time, it is filled with information that at the time was probably very difficult to write because you were breaking new ground, relying upon very little as compared to what we have today. And today, of course, everywhere I go now, anytime I hear a story about the Fed or anytime I'm seeing some sort of online discussion board about the Fed, there you are and there your book is, because Ed, you have made a massive impact in the world of monetary economics here in the United States. I'm really curious as we get started, just give us your general finger on the pulse take of what you think about 2016, the chances for QE4. Are we going to see rate hike? Just talk about the Fed for a moment.
Well, sure. That's a little unusual for me because usually we start, historically at the other end and come up to the present. But I like the idea of starting with the present because that's where the action is, of course. But it makes it a little difficult to make my ideas sound rational if we don't understand a little bit about the Fed. But nevertheless, that's the risk. So let's see where we can go with it. My idea about where we're headed with the chances for QE4 and that sort of thing is that we have no other place to go because the old saying is you can't get the spots off of the leopard. Federal Reserve System is a creature, and it's designed to do a certain thing and only that thing. It's a cartel. Jump back a little bit in history and make sure that our listeners understand that we're not talking about a government agency. We're not talking about an institution that is responsive to the political patterns of the day or the political opinions or the pressures. It's completely independent. It's a cartel, no different than a banana cartel or an oil cartel. Happens to be a banking cartel. And it was given the authority of government coercion back in 1913 when the Federal Reserve, the Act, was passed into law. All of a sudden, this cartel agreement between the banks for their own regulation was made into law. With that great accomplishment, brilliant accomplishment on their part, now that means that all Americans must comply with a private banking cartel, or else they'll be violating the law, which means they'll go to prison. And so since everybody knows that if you go to prison for not doing something, they assume that therefore that's the government that's behind it. You get half credit for that. It's a private institution. It's a banking cartel, but they enlisted the power of government to enforce their edicts. So now we have this monster, this creature in place, and it's designed to serve the interests of the banks. And it's not that, even though they talk a lot about, protecting the economy and controlling inflation and encouraging employment and all these good things that they have to say in order to make it sound like they really give a whoop about the people. They say those things, but when you follow what they actually do, everything they do is to enhance the power, the prestige, and the profit margins of the banking institution, because that's the kind of a creature it is. It's a banking cartel. So now, what does that mean in terms of what we can look forward to in the future? All a banking cartel can do, all it ever wants to do for its own interest, of course, is to expand the money supply. To expand the money supply is the solution to all problems as far as the banks are concerned. Because you see, the money supply is the inventory of the banks. And banks make money, well, in two ways. They actually manufacture it, but they don't make money by manufacturing it. They can't just print it and then spend it. What they do is they print it and lend it. It doesn't really go into circulation until somebody steps up to the bank window and says, hey, we want to borrow some money. Well, if the bank has plenty of money to lend, an unlimited supply of money to lend, well, that's good. That means they can lower interest rates. And because, if you're making money out of literally nothing, manufacturing it out of nothing, you don't have to charge a lot of interest to show a profit. And that's why they like to have this power of being able to create money to lend rather than having to solicit depositors to deposit money into the banks. You see, if banks were limited to only what depositors put into the banks, they'd have a lot less money to lend. And they only make money by lending money. So you see right away what the self-interest is there in having what they like to call an elastic money supply, is because they can just create the money and lend it, lower the interest rates, move the interest rates to whatever level it needs to be to get the customers to come in and borrow and pay that interest. So knowing that that's the nature of the beast, then it's easy to predict, I think, what is going to happen. They're going to have a QE 4 or 5, 6, 7. That's all they know how to do. Anything else that they were to do, like either restrict retract the money supply or restrict it to a certain fixed level, would be devastating to the profit margins of the banking industry, because that would restrict their inventory, it would restrict their ability to make loans and that sort of thing. So now, getting to the short answer to your question, yeah, they're going to continue to expand the money supply, and they'll always do that as long as they exist.
I'm curious, as you look at the overall economy, you also have this book, as we've talked about, The Creature from Jekyll Island, that you wrote many years ago. And all of this stuff is unfolding. All of this stuff is beginning to unfold. We saw it in 2008. We saw the lead up to it before 2008. You called it in your chapter, Bailout is the Name of the Game. I mean, you've been talking about this, and it's interesting how people have responded. You have people like a mutual friend of ours, Robert Kiyosaki. He's a friend of the show. He really adores your work. And what he tapped into was he understood what you were saying, Ed. He said, okay, I get the fact that everything is debt, so I'm going to go out and I'm going to leverage the debt for my benefit. So he actually learned how to use the system for his benefit, knowing that the system is going to eventually implode because it's unsustainable. I'm curious how you've approached it. You always have people on both sides. So you have Robert Kiyosaki, who has taken your information, is mesmerized by it and strongly believes in it, and he has reacted to it in this way. Then you have other people who read your book, and they go out and they buy gold and they put it underneath the ground, and they say, I don't know what to do. I'm worried. Here's my question to you, Ed. How have you responded personally from the knowledge that you know? What end of the spectrum have you been on in your own personal investments? And what advice would you have? Of course, you're not a financial advisor, but think about that 18-year-old kid who's just getting out of high school. He doesn't know. Of course, he should read your book, but he doesn't know much of that information. What would you tell somebody who's coming out of high school? How should they prepare for a debt-based world? And what have you done to protect yourself?
Well, first of all, I'd like to respond to Robert Kiyosaki's analysis of the situation and his model of how to deal with it. I really don't disagree with that, and it may sound like that's contradictory, but I think we have to understand Robert is not talking about going into debt for consumption purposes. He's not saying going into debt to buy a bigger house or a yacht or take a trip around the world or anything like that. He is specifically looking at real estate investments, and you could look at other types of investments, but his happens to be real estate. And he is simply saying that if inflation is going to happen because of this debt cycle that I was talking about earlier, the expansion of the money supply, then for business purposes, not for personal purposes, but for business purposes and creating cash flow, he's saying let's take advantage of that while it lasts. We know it's all going to end in a horrible spot, but right now we can either stand at it and look at it with horror on our faces, or we can try and manipulate it and jump in and take advantage of it and make some money along the way. And that's what his basic plan is. But however, when he says money, we have to be very careful because there's several definitions of money. And one of his really good lines is, where you shouldn't work for money. You should put money to work for you. And it's kind of a tricky thing, and he's right. But the point is that when Robert makes his cash flow and it comes in and all of a sudden he has more dollars at the end of the month than he did at the beginning of the month, what does he do with those extra Federal Reserve notes? Well, to a large extent, he'll turn around and put it back into the system again and parlay that process. But to another extent, he will take it and buy gold. Now, that is real money. or if you insist, let's say it's a different form of money. It's a more reliable, desirable form of money, perhaps. But anyway, so Robert is not opposed to money. It's just that when he says money, he's talking about Federal Reserve notes or fiat money, currency that is not backed by anything. But Robert is a strong believer of gold and silver and that sort of thing, which is the ultimate money. So we have to understand that he's not really talking about something different than what I am. And I would advocate that anybody who has the aptitude and the business ability, the personality, the drive, the perspective, the education, the background, the knowledge to pursue investments of that kind, putting money into an expanding currency system, that they should do it because it'll be to their benefit. But not everybody is in that category. I mean, face it, Robert is a genius at that. And the people who do this spend their lives learning and practicing and studying and following the changes that are constantly going on. So it's not for everyone. And that's my point. For the student coming out of school, he's not ready for that yet. He better get an education. He better study the real estate market or whatever market he's into. If he wants to go into minerals or whatever it is, art or anything, you have to become an expert. So it takes a lot of experience and knowledge before you can start to play the game. Because in an expanding economy, it's easy to make a profit because, prices are always going up. You can buy now and sell later at higher prices, not because the value went up, but because the dollar went down. So it's easy to look like you're making a profit in such an economy. But those economies also have dips. They're volatile. They go up, and then down, and then up, down, down, up, down. And if you're not really careful and you don't really understand what you're doing, you could be wiped out in one of those dips. So it's a dangerous game. And it's not a bad game. I mean, any real game football is a dangerous game. We got a lot of people who play football and so forth. So I'm not saying you shouldn't play football, but you better know how to play football if you're going to go out in the field and play against professionals. And you better have the right protection gear on. And maybe that's a good analogy. So for the student coming out of school, I would not recommend going out and playing in the big markets against the big players. You might dabble a little bit and learn as you go. Now, for the person who is sort of in the middle of life or approaching the retirement years, I don't know, doesn't sound to me like a very smart thing to do. I'm in that category. I'm one of those people that's trying to put away nest eggs. I figure the day may come when I may not be able to get out there and play that football game as hard as I used to. So I'm looking for the soft landing, and people who maybe don't have the aptitude to be competitive and aggressive and all of that in the marketplace ought to be thinking about that position earlier in life. So there's no single answer that it fits to everyone, and I think as long as we understand that the economy is, as we think of it, is going, in my view at least, is going to crash. And you better, whatever plan you better have that event pretty well included in your plan, in your contingency. What happens then? And what happens when you can no longer rely on currency and you're practically at a near barter stage? Or, and this is even worse, or you have to depend on the government for literally everything. What happens then? Do you have any way to protect yourself from becoming a sort of a serf in the system and serving your lords and masters who are giving you the benefits of food, clothing, shelter, medical care, education, all these things? If you don't want to wind up like that, you better be thinking in terms of putting something away that has lasting purchasing power other than dollars. And so that's my answer, and I think everybody should have that ultimate view in mind. No matter if they want to play the aggressive game, meanwhile, they ought to be thinking about the end of the game.
You're listening to the voice of G. Edward Griffin. He is the author of the best-selling book, very influential book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, a second look at the Federal Reserve. It's now in its 5th edition and 32nd printing. Ed, I want to talk to you about the upcoming Red Pill Expo. I want to talk about that in a moment, but before we do, let's switch gears just for a minute and talk about this crash that you're referring to. I would assume, and having read your book, knowing, having you on this program several times, I'm guessing that you're talking about the day that the Fed loses credibility. Let's talk about how that may unfold. We saw recently with the 9/11 story you've been hammering the 9/11 story for some time, and then we saw the Saudi Arabia come into the crosshairs. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia came into the crosshairs. They've been in the mainstream media lately. The petrodollar system now in flux. We're suddenly seeing all of this stuff that we haven't seen bantered about in the mainstream press with Saudi Arabia all over it. And now, of course, we just witnessed, and I hate to date this program, but one of the worst, if not the worst, mass shooting in U.S. history just occurred over the weekend by a gentleman by the name of Omar Mateen. He was a shooter in Orlando, killed 49 people, injured 53 other people, and he was traveling back and forth to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has given lots and lots and much more support than Iran or one of these other countries that we constantly complain about in the mainstream press. So here's my question. Saudi Arabia and how it is playing into the role with the U.S. dollar right now, can you see that as part of the overall crash that you see? Does Saudi Arabia play a role in that at all, considering its closeness and its close proximity to our currency? Or do you think it's something else? What causes that collapse in your mind based on your information that you've been studying for so many years?
Well, that's a really profound question, Jerry. And to tell you the truth, I hadn't really thought much about the role of the Saudis in the strength or weaknesses of the dollar specifically. I'm sure there are plenty of connections there if we took some time to analyze it, because there's so much pipe is so big that goes through there that the money goes in and out and around and about. But basically, I see the ultimate demise of the American dollar as something that's more historic because of more fundamental issues. Even if the Saudis weren't there, if they were completely out of the question, out of the picture entirely, I still don't think that would change the inevitability of the collapse of the U.S. dollar one bit, because of these historic factors. And well, what are they? Well, this is a simple fact. It doesn't have to be made complicated. Is if you expand the money supply at a rate faster than the expansion of goods and services, then the value, the purchasing power, that is, of the monetary unit keeps going down. It's just a question of ratio, If it takes as much effort, human effort, to produce $1 worth of silver, let's say, by mining it and refining it and minting it, if it takes a certain amount of effort to produce that, that is the amount of effort that $1 worth of silver, that coin, will buy in the marketplace in terms of suits and clothing and meals and anything else that requires effort. In a free market, the value of whatever is chosen in money with intrinsic value, meaning that it takes human effort to produce and it has a value of its own other than money, well, the monetary system always keeps pace perfectly with every other good and services because the common denominator is human effort. Well, once you get that human effort out of the equation, and now you can create money simply by raising your hand and say, okay, we got 51% vote on this, so now we're going to create another $9 billion, and we're going to bail out the banks or whatever we want to do. We just create the money. Well, then the money floods into the market, but the goods and services didn't jump by $9 billion that moment. So all of a sudden, the goods and services remain with their value, but the monetary unit goes down. And that is a process that always happens when you abandon gold or silver or anything else of intrinsic value that backs your money. So it always has happened throughout history. This is not a recent phenomenon. It's been going on for 1,000 years or more. And, so we don't have to guess about these forces. All we have to do is just open up a couple of history books and say, oh, okay, it happened there. Oh, it happened there. Oh, it happened there too. Well, I guess there's a force at work there. Even if we don't understand it, like I tried to explain it a moment ago, we know that it happens. So whenever humans have the ability to expand the money supply at will, completely by political decision or personal decision of any kind, even under the present system, the Federal Reserve can expand the money supply independent of the political will of the nation, but they have to monitor it and not get too far out of whack with it. But anytime humans can expand the money supply at will, you know what they're going to do? They're going to expand the money supply because it's to their advantage to do so, and they're going to continue to do that until finally the purchasing power of that monetary unit will approach and suddenly become zero. And that's the end of the line. And this, we're rapidly approaching that now, faster, I think, than most people realize, and not because of the amount of inflation that actually we can go out and feel in the marketplace, although that's bad enough, but because so many of the American dollars that have been created over the last few decades have been sent overseas. It's what they call the euro dollars, but they're sent all around the world, not just to Europe, because other nations have even worse monetary systems than ours, and so they use the American dollar as their medium of exchange, as their international currency. They couldn't really conduct big monetary transactions in most countries unless they could use the American dollar. So the world has been hungry to accept American dollars, and we can't seem to produce so many of them that the world doesn't want them. So we've been spared the inflationary effect of producing these dollars. We send these dollars overseas that it cost us nothing to manufacture, and we get back an automobile or a refrigerator or a television set. So we're doing very well on this. These other countries are not doing as well as we, believe it or not, because of the domination of the dollar. Well, that is coming to an end, as you mentioned a moment ago. People are losing that respect and that revere of the American dollar. Some countries have even said we're not going to use them anymore. And countries like China and Russia are maneuvering to try and replace the central point in international exchange, to replace America's dominant position. And that could happen almost any time. And when it happens, eventually it will happen, then all those old euro dollars will come flooding back to the United States. And all of the money supply here will suddenly very quickly double, quadruple, and even more. And all of a sudden, that deferred inflationary effect that we've enjoyed by being able to send our money overseas will come back to us. And they'll come back and they'll buy up anything that they can with those dollars. They'll buy up real estate, they'll buy up stocks and bonds, they'll buy up politicians, anything that's for sale. And the inflation effect that was deferred will be upon us. That will be the end of the line when the dollars virtually equal zero purchasing power.
Whenever that happens, all those dollars come flooding back, Ed. Do you envision, because you've written about this in your book, about war and how central bankers love war, it would seem like that would be the knee-jerk reaction or the first reaction. It would be to provoke a war, even if it requires a false flag. Do you see war between the U.S. and the inevitable hegemon of the 21st century, China? Do you see war unfolding due to this crash of the dollar between those two?
I have to be very honest on this one. I don't see it, but I don't mark it off the landscape either. It's just that I don't know which way they'll go. I do know that it's a definite possibility. What you just said is absolutely correct, that and this is an old stratagem, too. I think Machiavelli made it very clear in his book called To the Prince. And he said, when things get tough at home, and if you want to get the attention of the citizens away from what's going on at home, you just get involved in a war. Mm-hmm. And it works all the time. And that's certainly been a modern stratagem, we know. It's going on right now, as a matter of fact. We've got wars everywhere you look, and the minute you start criticizing anything that your government is doing, you're accused of being unpatriotic. Or as George Bush would say, you have to choose sides. Whose side are you on? And that's the end of the discussion. So that's the value of war. In war, you're supposed to look at your leaders with great respect and reverence. They're the leader, and if we don't have a great leader, then we lose the war and we lose everything, and so forth. It's a psychological game, and I don't know that it's going to get any worse. I know it's going on now, but your question is very profound, Jerry. Would it be an all-out war that would, involve weapons of mass destruction and all that sort of thing? I do not exclude that as a possibility, but I cannot say for sure that I see it as a necessary and absolute foregone event. But I do worry even more about a false flag operation. I think that that is more likely, and even that I don't see, but I think it's even more likely than an all-out war.
You're listening to the voice of G. Edward Griffin. He has written the tour de force in monetary economics for those who want to understand the Federal Reserve. It's an old book. It's been around since 1994, but it's in its 5th edition, 32nd printing, The Creature from Jekyll Island. If you don't have a copy, be sure to pick up a copy. In our concluding moments, Ed, in fact, why don't you tell the folks where they can get a copy? Of course, Amazon, but let's hear about your website. And also, talk to me about what we were talking about off the air. It's a brand new Red Pill Expo, something you're putting together with the Freedom Force International organization that you've been running now for a long time. Tell us about what's coming and some of the exciting things you were telling me off the air.
Well, thanks for that, Jerry. Yes. First, the book. Absolutely, you can get the book at Amazon. You can get it online in many places. A lot of bookstores are carrying it now, which kind of pleases me more than you can imagine. It's not only pleasant to know that bookstores carry your book, but I think back in the early days when I tried to interest bookstores in carrying it, and they weren't interested because we were a small publishing company. They don't have time for that, and so we just stopped promoting it. But it happened over the years that people were walking into the stores and asking for the book, unbeknownst to us. The first thing you know, they said, hey, we got 244 requests for this book last week, and this week we got 340 or whatever it is, and suddenly they were calling us and asking us to send them some books. Sure. So that was very sort of pleasant. By the way, I have to tell you, it's the 40th edition now, so there's a big market out there for doorstops, and very, very happy to see that develop. But anyway, yeah, the best place to order the book would be, we think, is from us, of course. We have an online bookstore, and it's called Reality Zone. That's realityzone.com. And we have about 100 different informational products there, books, recordings, and that sort of thing. And Creature from Jekyll Island is prominent among them. So that's realityzone.com. Now, Freedom Force International, that's my life right now, Jerry. I've decided, I've talked about problems all my life since I've been involved in this battle since 1960, actually. And back 2002, we decided to do something about it and start focusing on solutions. So we created an organization called Freedom Force International. And I hope if anybody wants to know about what we think the solution is, they'll go to the website and look us up. It's a long name, but it's easy to remember, freedomforceinternational.org for organization. And there's plenty there to read. And basically the story that is there is that we must recover control of our own political systems. And we cannot do that unless we have political power, political and social power. And one of the problems is that people like me, especially in my younger years, I would go around preaching against power. Power corrupts, I would say. And I would quote Lord Acton so eloquently. I would say, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It kind of rolls off the tongue, and it's a true statement. It's so true that power is a corrupting thing, and you can't trust human beings to be the way you thought they were if you give them too much power, because it corrupts individuals. So and I used to preach against power, that we must not have power because it corrupts. And then one morning, about 2002, I woke up in the morning, and I guess I'd been thinking about this, and I remember it very clearly because suddenly I was sitting up in bed, and I was saying out loud, because my wife, Pat, said, "What did you say?" I said, "We lose." And she said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, well, I'll explain it in the morning." Well, what I was talking about is that, yes, power corrupts, and it's very dangerous, but if you don't have it, you can't win. It's like guns, Now, guns are dangerous. People get accidentally killed with guns. They get shot on purpose with guns. Guns are extremely dangerous. Having guns is dangerous. The only thing more dangerous than having guns is not having them, you see. There comes a point where you have to realize that there are certain things that are dangerous, but if you back away from them completely, it's even worse. And so as long as we do not have political power, we can never take the power away from these individuals that now have it and are pushing us in the wrong direction. They're not going to let go of that power. They like it just fine. And so the issue now becomes, how do we acquire this dangerous thing called power, and at the same time create mechanisms and devices so that the people involved can watch their leaders like hawks and put in place rules and regulations and formulas and things like that and monitoring structures so that those people who are stepping out of line and who are appearing to be corrupted by it are easily replaced by those who are watching. That was something that's never been tried before. It's just been left open to society to take care of. But it occurred to me that if we created at the same time a structure that could reach for this power and take political power away from these guys that are now running the show, but at the same time create a self-regulating mechanism that could prevent our own leaders from going in the wrong direction. Never been tried before. Maybe it won't work, but I think it's time to try it. So that was the basis behind the idea of Freedom Force International. There's so much more about it, but that was one of the unique features. And so we've got this organization in place. It was formed in 2002, and it's international. We now have members in, I think it's 78 countries. So it's really growing. This problem is all around the world. It's not just here. And so we've been growing and learning and building and getting great people into the leadership levels. And now all of a sudden, we're at a place where we are about to do something really big. And the first project we have taken on is called the Red Pill Expo. Well, now we could have taken the formula of so many other groups in the past and said, well, okay, we're a patriotic organization and we're standing for freedom. Come learn about freedom, Well, that's good. Except, people have been doing that for a long time, and it doesn't sound very interesting. Of course, some of us, it sounds very interesting, but we're not interested to the ones who are in the choir. We're looking for the people we want to bring into the congregation for the first time. So we thought that the red pill allegory, based on that very popular movie called The Matrix, might be something that would sound a little entertaining, and it also carries a profound message. In the Matrix, humans are finding themselves living in a world of illusion. They think they're doing certain things, but they're really not. They're just completely slaves. They're captives. They're parts of a huge matrix, false intelligence, or artificial intelligence system. And they're dreaming about living and working and, working for a living and having a family and going to church and all that, recreating and playing games. But they're not really. They're just dreaming about it. And the reality is that they're just being used by the matrix. So we thought we would use that as the allegory because so many fields that we find ourselves concerned about, like wars and health care and monetary systems and all of that sort of thing, people are in a dream. They think it's one way, but it's not really at all that way. It's completely different. And so we thought we would use that as the umbrella to bring together all of the groups and individuals who have taken a red pill of one kind or another, and they now see the reality, and they want to help others see the reality and break out of the illusion too, provide this umbrella for everybody to come together and not only talk about their story and their vision, their concept of reality, but to realize that there's a certain commonality between them and all of the others who are there on different issues. And that commonality is that none of these illusions could exist unless there was a monopoly involved, unless we were forced to accept the illusion or under penalty of prison or death. In other words, the government gets involved. Take, for example, money. That's our field. We were talking about that now. Now, we have to use these Federal Reserve notes, don't we? We have to because of a law. The law says you have to use that money or you go to prison. Well, what if we didn't have to use it, What if we were free to use alternative currencies? Well, governments wouldn't allow that because then you wouldn't use their false money. So that's why they have the law, to force you to use their money. And the same thing with health care. You have to use only certain approved medications and treatments because the government says, well, that's the only stuff that works. And if you use anything else, it's quackery and you'll be violating the law. And everywhere you look, you find that somehow these totalitarians in their own fields have gotten hold of the government, and they got their buddies in Congress to pass laws to give them monopolistic control in the marketplace and that deny freedom of choice to the consumer. And that is the fundamental thing you find in almost all of these red pill, blue pill options out there. And I think once people realize that, they'll realize that this is the common solution to all of their problems, and that is to restore freedom of choice into the marketplace. And so that's just a short explanation of what we're planning to do. So we call it the Red Pill Expo, and this week we're going to choose a location. It'll probably be either Las Vegas or somewhere in Texas, maybe in Austin. But anybody listening that wants to know more about it, please look it up on the internet. The web page is up there. The earlier information is already up there, redpillexpo.org. And the dates will be November 11th through 13. I'll be there. Lord Monckton will be there. We just found out from England. He's one of the great opponents of this global warming illusion myth. He's a fantastic person on that field. He's internationally famous. Ty Bollinger will be there. He'll be talking about the myth of orthodox cancer therapies. I'll be there. I'll be talking about the illusion of money. Anyway, we're just beginning to build our speaker list, and I think you'll be very impressed by it. Anyway, that's the short version of the Red Pill Expo, and thanks for asking, Jerry. I hope that you'll be able to come.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I sure do appreciate all your insights today. It's been very, very helpful. For those who want to get a hold of you, they can go to your website, Reality Zone. Let's reaffirm those again, realityzone.com. And also you gave out freedomforceinternational.org, and then also redpillexpo.org. So quite a few websites there you can check out in your free time. Thank you again so much, Ed, for coming on the program. We look forward to it.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. And thanks for inviting me.
And I asked him to tell me what was on his mind. He said,